Welcome to Lead Pods, the official leadership podcast from USMB for pastors and church leaders, where our goal is to increase our impact together.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 27 of the USMB Lead Pods. My name is Matt Ersman, and I'm grateful to be your host as we tackle another important topic today. Today, I am going to be speaking with three of the USMB district ministers. I'm joined by Dan Strutz, Jordan Ringhofer, and Tim Sullivan, who are leaders for their individual areas of the USMB family. And today we're tackling COVID, the topic that just won't go away. But these guys, as district ministers, had a really crucial role in leadership, trying to help all of our local churches figure out how to do things during the pandemic, how to reopen, when to reopen, how to do technology, just all the things that we are all wrestling with. And so, as hopefully at least a lot of our churches are beginning to reopen and meet together again, we just wanted to talk together and kind of share some stories of things that have gone well, some things that have been really hard. And if you are a leader in your church family, I'm sure you had to wrestle with a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today. So if nothing else, you just know that you're not alone. We're still trying to figure all this out together in this new world that we're in. And so these three guys have a lot of important just stories to share that I think that some of them will be really encouraging to you. And they also have some really good encouragement that I think if you are a church leader, I think it will encourage you. And there's kind of some challenges kind of sprinkled throughout for people who are lay leaders in their churches as well. So again, this is a season where we've all had to just kind of figure things out together. And I hope this episode is helpful and encouraging to your local church family wherever you're listening today. So without further ado, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsor, and we'll get right to a conversation about COVID with the USMB district ministers.
Deciding on the right college is a big deal. At Fresno Pacific University, they get it. They are a private, nonprofit Christian university where your academic success is their priority. The Mennonite Brethren roots run deep from the classroom to the field. Professors connect you to research and internships. Financial aid makes your education affordable. And with our 4-year guarantee, you'll graduate on time to launch your career. Visit fpu.edu for more information about their undergrad, graduate, and degree completion programs. Fresno Pacific University. Possible happens here.
All right, my friends, welcome to another episode. We've got another really important topic, a leadership topic I'm excited to dive into. We are joined by some of the USMB district ministers today, so I'm excited to talk to them. And, as we're recording this, it's early April, and we've officially crossed the 1-year anniversary of the big shutdown when all of our worlds were just turned upside down and things were really crazy there for a while. And, everyone was affected, obviously, schools and businesses, and everyone had to make huge adjustments, but churches really had to shift things. And a lot of us had to do things we've never done before, had to completely shift how we were meeting. And so these guys were really instrumental in helping their communities do that. We're going to dive into that a little bit. So today I'm joined by Tim Sullivan, Jordan Ringhofer, and Dan Strutz, the district ministers that we're with today. So real quick around the horn, I want to give you a chance to introduce yourselves. Dan, let's start with you. Tell us about you. And you're also a pastor, right?
Yeah, I'm service at Community Bible Church in Mountain Lake, Minnesota. And that's where I am a lot of my time. And then I also have recently come into the district and help out with Rick Eschbaugh part-time as district minister. So dual roles there.
Jordan, how about you? Tell us about you.
Yeah, so I most recently served as the lead pastor at Hope Kingsburg, the Mennonite Brethren Church there in Kingsburg, California, which is where we currently live still. And starting September 1st, took over as the district minister for the Pacific District Conference. So I'm based now at Fresno Pacific University there on campus.
And our friend, Mr. Tim, how about you?
Yeah, I'm Sullivan. I've been district minister in the Southern District Conference for the past 17 plus years and live in Wichita.
And all of you have pastoral experience. And Dan, you were actually pastoring during this. So we've all got kind of some similar background, but also some unique situations that we can all speak to. So thank you all for being with us. And real quick, Tim, I think you've been the district minister the longest. So if people aren't really totally sure, what exactly is a district minister and what is your job? What are your responsibilities?
Well, when I figured that out, I could probably answer that. But one of the primary things when I first came on, I was told that being the pastor to the pastors was one of my primary responsibilities. but I found that it goes a lot further than that. One thing I've told people is pastors are oftentimes a little bit like cats. They don't like being herded. They don't like being told what to do. They don't like, you forcing them into a mold. But yeah, so I try and care for pastors, work with the different ministries that the district does from within the churches. So that's primarily what I do.
All right, so guys, again, this COVID thing it's just been hard, and I don't know, maybe we can talk about this, but things are starting to open up a little bit where I'm at in Kansas, but it's just been a crazy ride, and I'd like to hear from all of you. So in Kansas, where I'm at, oftentimes the federal government would say one thing, the state would say something different, the county would say something different, and the city would say something different. So we were constantly having to watch the news to figure out what the most local, most relevant thing was for our church family. And it was usually not very clear if we could meet, if we couldn't meet, if we had to wear masks, if we didn't have to wear masks. And it's just been a challenge. Has that been true for you guys as well, or the pastors that you've talked to? It's just been a hard journey, hasn't it?
Yeah, I would say that it's been interesting, especially up here. I'm in Minnesota, we serve in South Dakota and some of the other states. And so it's been interesting to just see how, even in our roles as district ministers, how you're trying to even figure out what each state has. So it's not, for me, it's not just my local church, but also as district ministers, each state has a little bit different. And so you're trying to interact with all those different rules and figure out where are people at. So it's been fun for this last year.
And Jordan, I imagine California has some of the stricter policies. So what has it been like in your neck of the woods over there?
Yeah, I mean, for us, between Oregon, Washington, and California, I mean, we have 3 states that have taken a very different approach to 2 of our other states like Utah and Arizona. So it's been varied for sure. And especially with California being as large as it is, we have counties that are butted right up next to each other. Like where I live in Kingsburg, we're right on the corner of 3 different counties. And so each county was in a different phase at different points and having different responses. And so with that, we also have 5 churches that are 5 English speaking churches that are all probably within about 20 minutes of each other. Wow. And all 5 churches took a very different approach during this season to how they responded. So that just kind of exacerbates some of the tensions that everyone's feeling and the uncertainty, because you have a church down the street that's in a different county sometimes reacting differently. You know those people, you've grown up with those people, and everybody's trying to figure out what's the right way to do things, the best way to do things. So yeah, it's been tough. And then a lot of being in a more rural area for California, nothing compared to what you guys are at over there, but for us, this is much more country kind of area. You get a lot of local shops that operate very differently than guidelines are saying. So a lot of confusing messages all right next to each other.
As spread out as we are across the central or the southern district, you get varied responses. Usually the metropolitan areas, Wichita, Kansas City, Oklahoma City, Denver, they just have a lot tighter restrictions. And I think people respond differently to that. More the rural areas, there are some places, some rural areas like in Kansas where there was some pretty significant outbreaks and people responded differently there as well. But it's been a pretty varied across the board in terms of how churches have responded. Some have struggled quite a bit with the masks, some less so.
Yeah, it's been a crazy journey for everyone. So now I'm curious if you could help us just share some stories from the 3 of you as the pastors that you've talked to. What are some of the biggest hurdles that your pastors have had to face? And obviously the meeting online, the technical aspect was a big deal, the knowing how to reach people who weren't comfortable coming. Like there's just so many things that were challenging. So what are some of the stories that you've heard that pastors have had to kind of overcome during this season? Dan, let's start with you again.
Yeah, I think some of the biggest struggles at first was a lot of the technology stuff, trying to figure out how do we do church and what does that look like? We gathered pastors online on Zoom and tried to work through problems. Each of our churches, if they're a rural church, it was a little bit, technology was maybe not as much as some of the ones that had established technology already prior to this. But, those were the first hurdles, but more so, and especially as I asked a few other guys in our district, the problems over this the difficulties, the challenges have been with people. It has become How do you disciple people in this? How do you keep a church congregation together and close? And as people are away, are they what's going on in their lives? And so there's a lot of that connecting that became a real big struggle, and probably still is, as we're starting to roll back and try to figure out who's comfortable coming back and who isn't. So
Jordan, what about you? What are some of the main struggles you heard about?
Yeah, it's interesting. It depends on really sometimes the ethnicity of the church. So we have a large Spanish-speaking population of churches, and there a lot of the struggles have been financial. A lot of their congregants have been displaced with work during this time. A lot that worked in the food service industry and different custodial or service type industries like that have just been stopped. And so there's been a lot of job loss there, and they were already typically in areas where there wasn't a lot of affluence, churches that weren't very affluent to begin with. So maintaining ministries where they can't get to the building but need to try to keep their rent up. We also have others where in some of our more kind of country remote areas where the internet speed has always been terrible. And so a couple members that serve on our Hispanic Council, we've always had to communicate to them using email, but recognizing that they have to use their phones to connect to their computers because it's just the internet's so bad out where they live. So during this time, for them to do things virtually has just been almost impossible. But then for our English-speaking churches, helping people feel connected, that's been the big challenge for a lot of them. With everything moving online at first, there was this swell of everybody being very excited for a number of people in their churches being excited that their church was finally doing things digitally, like giving online or being able to offer services where you can connect if you're gone. But that died off very quickly, and people just kind of got overwhelmed with that. So then you try offering new things, and just that momentum is not there. And so it's harder and harder to feel like you're connected with everyone, even if you're offering more communication than you ever have before. Kind of a constant refrain is, I just feel like you're not communicating this. And the reality is it's coming out 10 different ways, yet people are just so overwhelmed and they don't have that kind of incarnational physical presence. They just don't feel like they're connected or being communicated with.
And communication is always hard to a church family, but if you put yourself in the congregation members' shoes, I mean, they're getting correspondence with their kids' school, they're getting correspondence with their own business, they're trying to keep up with the city and state, whatever stuff too. Like we were just all bombarded with so much communication, often mixed messages. And so, like you're saying, Jordan, even if a church communicates really well, it's hard to cut through all that noise to get through what we need to say. And something else, I think you brought up a good point there. For the first few weeks, I don't think the shutdown, I would never say that it was fun. It wasn't fun, but I hear what you're saying about there was a little bit of energy of like, okay, we have a new problem to solve. Let's see how the church can handle this. Can we actually do something that'll be helpful for us long-term, even past the pandemic? And so I remember feeling that at the beginning. Like there's a little bit of energy of, let's figure out a new problem. Let's see what we can do. And it's funny now that we're at this time in 2021, I'm getting some of my Facebook memories popping up, from last year.
Right.
People are saying things like, I can't wait for this 3-week shutdown to be over. I'm just like, isn't that cute? But the longer it went on, I think it went from kind of a fun challenge to solve to just, like you were just saying, that people are just desperate for a connection. And that was harder and harder. The longer you're away, the harder it is to have that connection. So Tim, what about you? Was the connection piece another thing that you heard a lot about?
Yeah, absolutely. It was. In fact, that may be one of the primary pieces to this. Not only was it harder for pastors to connect with their flock, their congregation, there are ways to do that electronically. But when you're a pastor who is wired to care and to be physically present, all of a sudden that's taken away and there's just a big gap that's left. And that's really hard to fill, both from the pastor's perspective of wanting to be there, kind of a hands-on, high touch, high relationship kind of responsibility, but also then from people who need that. And all of a sudden care homes, hospitals, those are all cut off. You can't do the care that you want to do. And then I think from the other perspective, it's not just that the pastor couldn't do what he wanted to do, he couldn't be cared for in the same way himself. Mm-hmm. And so there's just this kind of pastoral care that happens as you're with people, with leaders, and when you're shut off from that, it doesn't feed your own soul, and you feel isolated and alone, and just struggle with how to do things in ways that I don't think Jesus meant us to do things, which is all virtual.
Mm-hmm. In the midst of that, if I can add this, as you're pastoring people and we're interacting, we all have very different opinions on how we should go about things and what we should be doing. And that has been one of the struggles too, is not just are you trying to care for people, but you're also trying to figure out, where is this person at? And how do I relate with them and relate with what they're going through, and shepherd them well when maybe we don't see eye to eye on things or whatever. So there are real struggles with just knowing where people are at and caring for what really mattered in this time. And again, that's still, I don't think that's gone off the table just yet.
Yeah, there's so much personality that's connected to pastoring, and I've spoken with several pastors where they adjusted sermon styles, presentation styles, those sorts of things. And while some in the congregation have enjoyed that, have appreciated that, there's so much that has been lost because that connection and that interaction just isn't there. And so I heard one person say, yeah, I like the sermon, but that wasn't my pastor. Like, that's not the person that I know, and that's not the person that I go to see, but it was a good sermon. And so, so much has shifted with just those things that are so special to congregations. Even though the quality of production has been increased in some sense, in some cases, just that special, unique character of the local church gets lost in that. And that's tough on people. That's one more thing that they have to grieve during this season, even if they are enjoying the message that they're hearing.
And one thing that we saw, I'm guessing you all saw that and your churches saw it, that the shutdown kind of gave people an opportunity to try new churches, which is both a blessing and a curse, right? Like, so we had people who joined our church during the shutdown, and we had people who left our church during the shutdown. And so when your only option is online, people, it's easier to jump over and try the church down the street, or, oh, hey, let's try this church in Dallas or whatever. And so the technology just added that extra layer of complication to kind of what you were saying, Jordan. Like, you can listen to a good sermon, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're actually connected to the church. And I think that was a big problem that I think a lot of us were facing during this.
I heard from a number of pastors who in their virtual feed of church, whether they're doing that, when they do it online, they were having people from all over the US who were connecting with them. And so one of the questions that they had was, how do we take responsibility now for this group of believers who've now kind of connected with our church? And that's a great question. And, it just proves the point that people are hopping online and looking around and finding different options. In some respects, will never be church the way we know it or have known it in the past, kind of highly relational, physical presence kind of thing. So that's another piece to this that I'm not sure how much responsibility pastors need to bear or churches need to bear to find a way to do church with people who are, half a country away. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, we've all had to reevaluate what church, the definition of what even a church is. What is a church member? Here at First and B, we had someone contact us and ask if they could join our church, become a member, and they've never stepped foot in our building before. And so it's just a whole new set of challenges that we're all going to have to face together. Dan, just a second ago, you said something I wanted to come back to. You were talking about how, we all have different opinions about how this is going, and balancing that as a pastor, knowing where people are coming from, especially when things got kind of heated. One of my least favorite things, one of the most frustrating things to me, is how, the mask stuff, the shutdown stuff, unfortunately became very political, and people kind of judged each other's politics, judged each other's motives based on whether they were wearing a mask or not, whether they were coming in person or not. And it became so heated. It was not really about coming to church or not. It was about, all these other side issues that became so heated. And to me, that was one of the hardest things to see, that as a pastor, I imagine that has to be so hard to balance. you guys have any input on that part of this whole thing?
No, well, I think, yeah, it's, you're trying to do that. And I've thought in my own church, and I think other guys would say this as well, there's a shepherding thing that first off, you got to sit there and say, I might have my personal opinion hat that I wear, but I also have to have my pastoral hat that I have to care for this whole flock. And then you try to teach from that, or teach from how do you represent that? How do you care for people well? How do you do that? And so I think that we're learning almost new skill sets in that. And you mentioned that it did get politicized, and maybe that's an ugly side of this whole thing. But at the same time, I also say pastorally, one of the things that I've noticed as I've interacted with guys is it's also maybe exposed some of the things that people hang on to, some of the idols and stuff in their lives. And so over this last year, I think we've seen some of that. And I kind of described it as, you see suddenly some weeds in the garden that are popping up, and you're able to interact with those and pastor into those things that it's like, had COVID happened, you probably wouldn't have known. And so, if I have to find a silver lining, that's maybe it in that whole thing.
The flip side of that is that it also creates a tension that sometimes you just don't know how to deal with it. We've had one pastor announce his resignation, not totally because of COVID and because of the tensions that exist from within the congregation, but partially because of that. It just wore on him. And so finding ways to do soul care for pastors and for them to understand how important that is in their own life in the midst of the kinds of competing ideas or competing perspectives on how you do church during this, that's pretty important. How you care for yourself in the midst of that.
Yeah. And I think that's more common across our districts. And I think it's a reminder to our churches to say, how do you love on your pastor in this time? Because, I was interacting with a couple of guys, and one of the guys said, and this is a pastor that's been in his church for a while in our district, and he said, this is probably one of the first times I've thought about leaving, and that's from the source that came from surprised me, and first time in years. And so I think that's just a reminder, and I pray that for pastors that this is just a season and we get through that. But there is some fatigue factor in this, and that goes beyond this. That goes beyond to, teachers and anyone that's in the people business. They're wrestling with those things right now.
Yeah, that sense of like that comment of a pastor saying, this is the first time I've thought about leaving. It's been interesting to see which pastors are feeling that way too, because you might think that it would be some of the pastors where it might exclusively be some of the pastors where their church is really not happy with their response. But I've heard it from pastors where their church is really unanimous in what a response needs to be. And yet, while they have that way forward, I think there's something that is lost when you just kind of only have one way of going about something, to where then the rest of the tension that you're experiencing once you leave your church, once you leave that environment, you don't know how to handle that. And it just weighs on you so much more. I've been really impressed with a number of churches in our area that have come to decisions that are not in line with what like the majority of the board is feeling, like their elder board or their council, whatever it is, but that they've reasoned through how it is that they disagree and then come to a conclusion on what's best for their church in that season. And I've seen a lot more help from those pastors during those times than I have from the ones where the board is saying all one thing, or only a few people are saying one thing and then others aren't speaking up. So where churches have worked hard at dealing with conflict, dealing with different opinions and walking through those together, I've seen a lot more support for pastors, even more so than some of the ones where the board's pretty unanimous. This is the way we're going forward, and it's not going to be that way. And we've had churches on both sides, again, right down the street from each other in some cases, where one church has said, we're not opening to do a single thing. Others that have said, we're opening tomorrow and going to push through. The pastors have, in both situations, they just feel an immense burden on their shoulders, I think, in those situations, because they don't know how to process that conflict, and they don't necessarily have a safe space to process their own kind of doubts or uncertainty about what's the right move.
And we're probably preaching to the choir a little bit. There's probably a lot of pastors and church leaders listening today, but gosh, it has just been so hard. And I'm not the lead pastor, so I'm not having to make the top level decisions, but just watching the people voice their concerns equally loud on both sides. People who think we're opening way too soon and people who think we should have opened a long time ago. Like, they're equally passionate, and they've each got their own set of data and whatever they want to back themselves up. There was not a clear win for anyone during this time. And there's just a large burden placed on pastors. So Jordan, you talked about this a little bit. I want to hear from the other two. What are some other things that you've seen over the past year, some examples of how churches have navigated this successfully? Hopefully we won't have this exact thing again, but if next time there's something like this, some sort of conflict that we're all having to wrestle with, you were talking about, Jordan, how sometimes it's good to have a variety of opinion among leadership. What are some other things that you've seen that have been helpful for the churches working their way through this?
Because I was just speaking to a pastor who's not from my district, so I won't say whether it's from Dan or Tim's, but it's from one of the two. And he was just sharing that the ownership that his board has taken, with the different opinions, the way that they've owned the decisions they've made and then responded by engaging those church members, showing up to, small group gatherings, showing up to people's homes, the way that other people in leadership have then owned that and not left that responsibility on the pastor, has really been just a huge blessing to those pastors and to those churches, because that's something where we so often understand as pastors the difficulty of having a board meeting, going through a decision, and then you leave and you feel like you're the only one then that takes on whatever decisions were made. So you know that you're responsible then for finding that creative video for Easter Sunday, just like Dan is having to do right now, right? You're the one responsible for doing all those things. And in this season, more churches, I think, their boards have come around them and said, this is our responsibility. We need to help out in this situation. And that's been really cool to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would echo that. I've heard from several pastors, those pastors who have a strong support system from within their board, and their board who has kind of maybe even been front and center in terms of helping communicate what the plan is and why they're choosing a particular way of doing things. That's been really important for the pastor. It's taken some of the pressure off of them. One of the pastors I talked to also commented, he said, one of the things that he really appreciated was within the congregation, there were individuals who were, so for instance, strongly against wearing masks. But when the board said, we're going to wear masks just out of reverence for one another, caring for one another, he said what was really encouraging to him was to see some of those same people who were against masks put on masks, come to church and participate, knowing that they're doing that for the good of the whole. And he said that was just such a great encouragement to him.
No, I mean, I think finding ways to communicate, and I think the big thing in this is to say, we got to find what is at the center. When we got to find what is in places of disagreement or whatever, find to start with, we agree with Christ. We agree with that. And man, he's good, and he's going to get us through this. Because the world would want us to start off on the fringes in whatever our political perspective is or whatever, but to move towards the center and say, okay, let's put that aside and say, what do we agree on? And also to say within our churches, hey, we might disagree on something like this right now, but be reminded that in 99 other issues out of 100 issues, we would say that this person, I trust them. And so to just reestablish to say, in this one issue, let's remind ourselves that we do care, we do trust each other, we love each other, and start there, and kind of work out to this stuff and create a common bond and foundation first before you try to tackle some of these issues.
So we've already mentioned a little bit that there's been some good that's come out of this. Like it's been super hard. We probably would never wish this on anyone to have to go through all this to figure out things quickly on the fly like we all have. But I'm sure you've also heard some positive things. So let's maybe go around the horn a little bit and why don't you share both from your pastors or from congregations that you've heard about. What are some good things that are coming out of this?
Well, we've talked about some of those, the increased capacity for technology and working with that. That's something that some churches, it may have been decades before they'd really have to grapple with that and engage with that. So that's been helpful. I think in some respects, any kind of trial refines everyone. And this will refine the church. I don't remember whether it was Dan or Matt or Jordan talked about it. It kind of helps clarify what the idols are in our lives or in the lives of others. That's really a good thing. It helps point us to areas in our life where we need to kind of think about, well, how does Christ view that? How would Jesus deal with things? And is that really that important or crucial? So I also think one of the things that it's going to do, it's going to, the attendance piece, there will be people who will stop out probably, and they'll do church from their living room, maybe for the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. And that may be okay. I'm not sure that's the way that God's designed us, but for the rest, I think it will create a value within the rest of the congregation. For those who gather again, it'll just reaffirm the value of being together in worship and experiencing that as a body, as a family. Mm-hmm. So I think those are some things that are of value that come through this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was what was really cool, was to see a number of people, as we were trying to wrestle with how do we gather again, what can we do, even the idea of singing in a gathered place, to see some people that you wouldn't expect are like, I want to sing songs, I want to worship, or see new people in the church take on new or different responsibilities that they hadn't had before. Suddenly it's like, hey, there's an empty spot here, I have to step into this. I think those are good things. Those little new things where stuff's been shifted just a little bit, and now people have to step in or participate in a little different way. It's probably good too to think from from some of our established churches to be shifted a little bit, to think how can we maybe do this or that a little bit differently. It creates an opportunity for a little bit of creativity in there, which is good. And I'll just make a plug. As a district minister, I've been thankful in this. One of the good things is to see our church family come together. I got to give a shout out to the guys at MB Foundation and how they've come around and helping create funding for churches, especially some of our ethnic churches and struggling churches. Our MB family is great. And I think that they've said, hey, we want to step to the plate and help in these times, so we can go through this together, not just as individual churches, but as a corporate body.
Yeah, that's been a huge blessing. Support that MB Foundation has given, the way that the district's rallied around helping fund that. That was really cool to see, and especially because we as district ministers, we get to be a part of approving those grants and that assistance that goes out, and so we get to talk to each other about the needs going on in our districts, and so getting to know what types of churches. Like I know that we have we have 5, 7, something like that, different languages spoken in the PDC. But now I've learned more about the Central and Southern District and the different cultures and ethnicities and languages there. And being able to see our churches and our families work together to promote this U.S. family that we have, right? We're one small piece of a global family, but to be able to work together has been really cool. We've also seen, and I keep remembering more people during this time. I've only been in this role now for about 6 months, but in the last year, we've had, I think it's 5 different pastors called to lead positions. One pastor that was sent off to another state over to Tim's area to start a new ministry. We've had 3 church planners called to lead campuses. And so we have 2 that have opened and 1 that's about to open. One of them actually to give a shout out also to Lakeview Grantsville campus over there in Utah. It's opening officially tomorrow, but they've already been up and running for a few weeks now, and it's been awesome. And so we have some ministries here at churches where they've been in a process of transition, and during this time they said, you know what, we're going to keep this transition going, and they've launched new ministries and added staff and changed the way they do things. Another pastor that said, while this has been a struggle, he's just used it as a time to say, let's let some of those sacred cows die. Mm-hmm. And when we come back together, they're just not going to be conversations that we have anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's ready for things to be new. The teams come together. They treated it almost as a relaunch. And so they're making plans to say, how is it that we can just let those things go and then move into the good things and build on that for what this next season is going to be. And that's an opportunity that we all know when you try to change that one thing in a church, you really need something from the outside to help you out, because it's very hard to get that change yourself. You will always be the bad guy. Now, thank you, COVID, for being the bad guy for us all in some of these cases.
Yeah, sometimes you need some time away, right, to see what needs to be changed. Or I've also noticed at First MB in Wichita that some people, I think it's one of those things where you don't know what you've got until it's gone, right? As we have reopened and people are coming back, they're so excited to be back, and they're like, oh, I missed this place so much, and I miss being able to sing. I miss seeing you guys. Like, there's kind of this joy that we wouldn't have if we had just met every week like we always had. And kind of what you were saying, Tim, that there's this kind of refining process. I heard someone say kind of what you were saying, that we're probably not we may never reach, our church attendance may never reach pre-COVID numbers ever again. And some people may never come back. And that's hard, and we don't like that. But this person said there's also a pretty good chance that the people who did come back are going to be way more fired up than they've ever been before. Their faith's going to be way more solid, way more important to them than it ever was before. So we might see a little bit of a dip in numbers, but the actual impact and the passion and the faith may grow exponentially during this time. And so I'm excited to see what that looks like as we continue to hopefully see things turn around. I'm excited to see how that continues. So again, that's kind of a good transition as we begin to wrap up here. I'm hoping that your churches all see some of the similar things that I just said, but what are some other things that are encouraging to you as we have reopened up in many cases? What are some other things that are exciting? What are you looking forward to? How else can this help grow our ministries long-term?
I hope that as we come out of this, that there's opportunities for reconciliation and working through this, where we can sit there and say, hey, we were on a different page back a year ago. I said some things that were maybe I didn't mean, and I'm sorry for that. And we can have opportunities to forgive and to draw again around the center. I hope that that's the case. And I think it starts to build us on things that are really important, rather than some superficial things. And I hope that that's where Jesus is glorified through this as we come out of this.
Yeah, I want to echo that. Were a lot of things that so many of us depended on pre-COVID, and whether it's systems and structures within the church, outside of the church, this last season has been it's made we are all so acutely aware of how much we cannot depend on those things, that we need to really depend on Christ, that we need to depend on God's truth, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that's where we find life. With Easter just coming up in a couple days from when we're recording this now, I'm reminded of the sermon, my last Easter sermon that I gave. I didn't know it would be the last one at the time, but speaking to my church and saying, when we come out of this, we don't want things to return to normal. We want resurrection. We want new life. That's what the cross is. That's what we have the opportunity to step into. And for so many of our churches and our people, they've all become aware, I think, during the season of how, when we are turned inward and we're looking at what we think we need, that we keep seeing how much life is lost in that. And really we need to die to ourselves, and we need to become alive in Christ. And we need to remember that we are to go and make disciples, that this world is desperate for that message of something different. And the church is the only place, Christ is the only one that can offer that. And so we can step boldly into that. And because we have this opportunity to really be rebirthed into this next season, we have an opportunity to embrace that as the church in ways that we didn't anticipate before. We might have thought might not have been possible.
I think one of the things that I've heard from a couple of our pastors who've had a difficult experience, but also a positive experience, and that is that people who have encouraged them along the way, the members of the church who've come alongside them and recognized just how difficult a season this has been. That's been really important for their encouragement. And so maybe just a word of encouragement to those who are lay leaders or lay persons who are listening to this podcast. to make sure that you appreciate your pastor. Make sure that you tell them you understand. Maybe you don't fully comprehend, but you understand a little bit some of the struggle that he or she's gone through, and then offer a word of encouragement. Try and be there for them. So that's one of the things that I think helps pastors make it through really difficult pieces, is people who come along and encourage them and support them, even in the midst of really difficult circumstances.
All right, guys, so as we begin to wrap up here again, I'd like to give you guys a chance, since you guys work with pastors directly, and I'm sure you've been in touch with probably all your pastors, but maybe there's another pastor listening who hasn't been in touch with you or their district minister, or maybe they're at a different church, or whatever the situation. As we said today, this has just been a really challenging time for church leaders. And if someone listening today is one of those who have considered quitting after all this, or they've just had some really hard days, I wanted to end today with just some encouragement, whatever we can do to help those people listening. So take it away, any of you guys. How can we help today, or what can the churches do? How can we bless those pastors who are really struggling right now?
I'm going to take the easy answer and just encourage people to pray for their pastors. It seems like the obvious thing, but it's very real. I think pastors have experienced, as one told me, he said, this has been spiritual warfare that we've been fighting. And so I would encourage, pastors to know that people are praying for them. There are people who've been praying for them, are praying for them, and will be praying for them. And if necessary, call some people and just say, I need you to pray for me. I need you to pray prayers of encouragement, strength, boldness, whatever that issue is. But the issue of prayer, and prayer against, a spirit that wants to attack and tear down God's church.
Yeah, I just want to encourage pastors to remember, like Tim was saying, prayer, remembering that, just like Ephesians 6 reminds us, right, that it's not enemies of blood and flesh, but there is something much bigger going on here. And within that, then remembering that we are also blood and flesh. We are people. And as pastors, just to remember that while your church has been going through a season of trauma in so many ways, that you've also been going through that season. And it's okay for you not to be okay. It's okay for you to need some time to recover, to not have it all together, to not have all the answers. And so just like we have hopefully all been trying to give congregations space and opportunity to process, that we too need to give that time to ourselves, and that it's okay for it to take a while for us to feel okay as pastors and leaders. And in this season, not to feel like it's your job to fix everything, that it's not your job to change everything to find the right answer, but that you have a body of believers around you that are there to work with you, and that ultimately, and depending on one another, we can come together as the body of Christ and celebrate the different ways that we can individually respond for the collective good, right? So you might need a hand more than you need a foot at that moment. And if you're a pastor that's much more like a foot, depend on that hand in that season right then, and allow yourself that space to continue to heal and to recover, and trust that God's at work. He's not done with his church, and he's going to continue to be at work. So you got this, he's got it. Just keep going, and and depend on that body that he's blessed you with.
Yeah, I think it's been alluded to in this conversation that we're recording this on the weekend right before Easter. We're actually, it's Good Friday today, right? And one of the verses that has been on my mind a lot in this season, and I'm just reminded of, and I would say this, apply this to pastors, for us that are in the grind right now, is, Jesus reminds us, he says, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. So whoever believes in him, may have eternal life. And just to continue on this Good Friday day, to look to the cross, to look at what Jesus had done, how he sacrificed himself, and not, both for us as individual pastors, but also for his church. And it's a great reminder as we sit here today, and I'm thinking about this and saying, pastor, myself, and all of us, to say, Jesus is really more committed to his church, to his bride, than we are.
and to say so much that he sacrificed himself for it. And he loves his bride, and he's there, and he's mindful of it, and he hasn't forgotten that, and he hasn't forgotten us in this. So to just be reminded of that, and to look to him and trust the Spirit is going to bring life in these times, that we are going to praise him for, and that we're going to see unexpectedly. So.
And I think one of the words that I keep hearing during the whole COVID season is just grace, right? Everyone needs to be more generous with grace right now. Even as things are coming out, like we're all going to face hard days where we're, maybe more emotional, and so we don't handle things as well as we would on a normal day. Or I've heard something like, it's normal for normal people to act unnormal in unnormal times, or something like that, right? Like, we have just gone through a pandemic that will be in history, and it's been a situation this past year, and we're still in it, where we need to give our congregation extra grace. They're dealing with, kids and jobs and politics that we haven't had to do before. We need to give each other, other pastors, other church leaders grace as they're trying to figure all this out. And like you were saying, like, we need to give ourselves some grace. If we didn't handle this season perfectly, you may have some regrets about how things happened. And if congregation members are hurt, or maybe they left because of your decisions, that's a heavy weight to carry. But we are human beings doing the best we can in a very unnormal time. And so I hope the pastors listening today, give yourself some grace, give the people around you some grace, and God is going to use this to further his kingdom, and he already has, and we will continue to do that. So, well, Dan, Tim, and Jordan, thank you for serving your churches so well. Dan, especially as you're leading your own congregation, I can't imagine the load that you have to carry. So thank you for your time today, and just for leading so well around the USMB family. Grateful for you guys.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Thanks for what you're doing here too with Lead Pods.
Thanks, Matt.
The Christian Leader magazine is your starting place for information and community among our U.S. Mennonite Brethren family. With news stories, features, columns, and bi-weekly email updates, The Christian Leader is your source of connection to our broader USMB family. Subscribe to C-Link, our bi-weekly email newsletter, at www.christianleadermag.com. You can also subscribe to our print magazine online or by contacting your local MB Church office. Christian Leader, connecting and informing our USMB family since 1951.
All right, well, once again, my thanks to Dan, Tim, and Jordan for joining us. And I also want to thank you. If you're listening, again, I'm guessing many of you are either pastors or church leaders. And I know this has been a very difficult season. And I've been in some meetings where we've had to make some hard calls. And I know the weight that some of you are probably feeling. And so I just want to thank you for leading during this crazy time. And I really do hope that as things reopen and there's at least a little bit of sense of normalcy in your communities and your churches, I hope you just are refreshed by people coming back with people's stories of how God has been at work. And I hope as we continue in what still kind of feels like a new year in 2021, that we can see some really good things come out of the season that we've been in together. So again, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for listening today. We always are grateful for those of you who are downloading and listening and sharing the episodes. So thank you very much. Hope you have a really great rest of your week, and we'll be back soon with another episode. And in the meantime, as always, we'd love your help to spread the word. So if you could shoot a text, share the link on social media, or help us spread the word about the show, we'd really appreciate your help. So all right, have a great week, and we'll see you next time right here on the Lead Pods.
Thanks for listening to Lead Pods. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing to our show wherever you're listening today. Learn more by visiting usmb.org. And be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you next time as we learn more practical tools to increase our impact together.